tell a story about the Vilna Gaon. As a young child, and of course he was a prodigy, and the story goes that the Azarya once came to Vilna, and he raised the following question, or he asked the Gaon the following question. And the Gaon was a little boy, was presented to him. And the Azarya asked him the following question. The Gemara says in Pesachim that Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya, where did they learn to be mesirut nefesh, to allow themselves to be thrown into the fiery furnace rather than bow down to the pestle of Nebuchadnezzar? So Gemara says that they made a kal v'chomer from the frogs in Mitzrayim. He said, Madoch, the frogs in Mitzrayim, who were not commanded in Kiddush Hashem, they were not mitzvah, and yet they went into the ovens, as the Pasuk says, they went into the ovens of Mitzrayim, and they must have been incinerated. So we, who are commanded in the mitzvah Kiddush Hashem, so that we have the obligation to be mesirut nefesh. So the Azarya asked the Gaon, how can the Gemara say that the frogs were not commanded in Kiddush Hashem? They weren't commanded to be mesirut nefesh. They were commanded. Because the Pasuk says that v'olo v'secha, chadam mishkavcha, uv'mashar yisecha, and uv'tanu recha. The Pasuk says that the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Moshe said to Parashat, that the frogs are going to go into the ovens. So that means that the Rebbeinu Shalom told the frogs, commanded the frogs, directed the frogs to go into the ovens. So that's it. See, if the Rebbeinu Shalom says go into an oven, if the Rebbeinu Shalom says to a frog that go into an oven, despite what's going to happen to you there, so that's a tzibur. So they were mitzvah, no less than Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya. So the guy, the little so he answered that even though the frogs were commanded to go into the ovens too, but no individual frog was commanded to go into, was directed to go into the ovens. The frogs were said, the tzibur was that the frogs should go into the bedrooms and into the living room, into the dining room, and into the oven. So some of the frogs have to go into the oven, but there was no individual frog. Every frog could have said, why should I go into the oven? Let some other frog go into the oven. Let some other poor dumb frog go into the oven. Why should it be me? Why me? And nonetheless, so they weren't mitzvah. No individual frog was mitzvah to go into the oven, and they went nonetheless. There were frogs who went into the ovens. So that's what the Gemara means, that they weren't mitzvah, and yet they went in. Of course, we're mitzvah Kiddush Hashem. But Hashem commands every Jew to be mesirut nefesh, not to be able to Azarya. So that we have to be mesirut nefesh. The Azarya was very impressed with the answer, and he kissed him, and that's the story. So I think there's a very big depth in this story, because the truth is the Gemara, of course, is altogether hard Gemara to understand. How do we go to kal v'chomer from the frogs? The one has to be mesirut nefesh or Kiddush Hashem. Frogs are not bali b'chir altogether, and not particularly intelligent as far as I know. I mean, maybe Kermit accepted. So what was this business? The frogs, they were the frogs, they went to the oven, they were mesirut nefesh, as if they knew what's going to happen to them in the oven. I never heard anybody say that the frogs in Mitzrayim were mesirut nefesh al Kiddush for Kiddush Hashem. We should say that the Kedeshim, they were mesirut nefesh. So what's probably more altogether? I think the Gemara, the Gaon is helping us understand. The Gemara is really saying something very, very profound. The truth is, why did Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya need to learn anything from the frogs? We all know there's a mitzvah v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, and bekhol v'chol nafshecha. Pasuk in Chumash, they needed to go to the frogs. So pasuk in Chumash, bekhol nafshecha, feel leitlus nafshecha. The person's mitzvah to be mesirut nefesh, rather than to be able to Azarya, one of the cardinal avers. The answer I think is that Jews have been mesirut nefesh for Kiddush Hashem many times throughout history, but usually they did so collectively. Entire communities were mesirut nefesh rather than be led to the baptismal font in the Middle Ages, and many times throughout history. But what was unique about the circumstance of Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya is that all the other Jews around them were not mesir nefesh. All of the other Jews bowed down to the pestle of Nebuchadnezzar. And Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya stood alone. And by rights, they could have asked themselves, even if there is a commandment of mesirut nefesh, but why me? Why us? Why should we, dafka, be the ones to be mesirut nefesh? Why not somebody else? Did somebody else step forward and make the demonstration? And the answer, they themselves learned the answer from the story of the frogs. Because the story of the frogs is sort of a thought experiment. Of course, the frogs, not by the b'chira and not particularly bright, but it's a thought experiment. Imagine if the frogs were intelligent and knew what they were getting into. So imagine if each and every frog, the Baruch said, so every frog would make a cheshbon. Why should I be the one who goes into the oven? Why me? Some other frog do that. I'll go into the bedroom. I'll go into the closet. I'll go into the piano. Let some other frog go into the oven. So what would have been the result? Every frog can make such a cheshbon. That's right. Why me? Why? But if all the frogs would say that, so what would be the upshot? The upshot would be that the Dvar Hashem would not be fulfilled. It would be Chil Hashem. So Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya, they learned the lesson from that. That was the lesson they learned. And they said, of course we could say, why me? But if everybody says, why me? If every Jew says, why me? Why should I be the one? Everybody else is doing it. So why can't I just be like everybody else? And the ultimate result is nobody's willing to set an example. Nobody's willing to step forward. And Mishael. So rather than say, why me? Learn the lesson from the frogs, and they say, it has to be somebody. On the contrary, it's a privilege. It should be me. I'll be the one to be Mekadashim Shemayim. I think that's a very profound lesson for us in many circumstances. Very often, we make excuses for ourselves, something we know it's not right. We say, look, everybody else is doing it. Why should I be the one? Why should I be the one to pay the price? Why should I be the one to take an example from current circumstances? The person looks around and says, other people are not being compliant. They're not worrying about wearing masks. They're endangering. Everybody else is doing it, so I have to be the one. People are going to laugh at me. They're going to say, why me? The end result is a Chil Hashem. And on the contrary, if a person is willing to step forward and to behave properly the way the Torah requires, the Torah demands, then people will follow his example, his good example, rather than his following the bad example of others. So that's a lesson that we can also learn from the frogs. A lie that we shouldn't have the mesirut of Chananya, Mishael, and Azarya, but each one of us in the mesirut that life presents us, we can learn this lesson that we can be nicely kavachayim for ourselves from the frogs in Mitzrayim, who set a good example for us.